Chapter 4, Crimson Song, First Part. Then, Minsky pressed his hands against his twitching cheeks. The commander was handpicked by the sacred ancestor himself. No. Could it be? No. Could it be? A red wind gusted into the general's hearts, blowing away sand and rock. The wind surfaced a rumor they'd forcibly kept hidden and dared not contemplate. The sacred ancestor has a son. It existed in a realm of consciousness beyond the reach of thought. Only rumor, which none were allowed to touch, dwelt there. Suddenly, the bronze door opened, putting an end to the intractable chaos. The men blinked at the shadow at the door and cried out at once, "Greylancer." The self-righteousness swelling inside the generals turned to dust and vanished. It was the moment they acknowledged the presence of the one warrior that eclipsed them all. "The 6 demon generals. It has been a long time," said Greylancer, his voice dripping with disdain rather than nostalgia. The nobility's vaunted generals were little more than callow recruits in his eyes. Looking down at the paralyzed man, he said dispassionately, "Gaskell is not here. Perished has he?" And continued, "By order of the Privy Council, I will take command of tomorrow's attack on the OSB moon base. I expect nothing less than your full efforts." Giving them not a moment to object, Greylancer ran a hand across the air. "Here is the plan." An image of the moon 10 meters in diameter appeared before him, pitch break indicated by a small cross. "We proceed as planned. Go," said Greylancer as his chariot picked up speed. Was this some kind of fantasy or fairy tale? The greater noble's vehicle, racing through space toward Earth's moon, was none other than a wheeled chariot from human antiquity. Flying close behind was a fleet of aircraft, all with wings arched like those of bats. The nobility had previously attempted several attacks against the OSB frontline base, on the far side of the moon, 300,000 kilometers from Earth, but it only managed to delay the OSB infiltration of Earth. A fact that made the temples of the Privy Council members pulse with rage. None of the allied aircraft's propulsion nozzles were lit. An anti-gravitational propulsion field surrounding each of the craft propelled them forward instead. Perhaps having foreknowledge of the imminent invasion, the OSB commenced their attack. Soon, golden laser beams crisscrossed this way and that around the fleet. Soon, atomic cannons. "If you go down, wait on the lunar surface for the rescue vessel," Greylancer ordered. A beam shot at Greylancer's chariot, and was refracted away as if skipping off an invisible spherical surface. When the fleet came within 3,000 kilometers of the moon, a swarm of OSB aircraft rose up from the surface. "Move to single combat maneuvers. When you've destroyed your target, after me." A human field general typically operated from the rear, but a noble of any metal led his men into battle. The attack order was not forward, but after me. These were Greylancer's chosen words. Noblesse oblige, the obligation borne by humans of high birth, royalty, and nobility, in return for their high ranking. Driven by this obligation, the nobility always stood at the vanguard of their fleet. Cowards were they that shouted forward from a position of safety. Noble warriors simply said, after me, and were the first to draw weapons fire. And so too did the nobility's greatest warrior. But were not nobles immortal? No. The enemy's primary weapon was not the atomic cannon, but what followed. The OSB fired a spread of graviton spheres. When they came into contact with noble aircraft, they neutralized the anti-gravitational propulsion field. One after the next, the ion engines of the bat-shaped aircraft flamed on. The atomic cannon followed, destroying the aircraft. And then, as the jettisoned pilots plummeted through space, a barrage of stakes and steel arrows rained down to impale them. Greylancer threaded his chariot past the spheres, and destroyed them as he passed, and closed in on the moon base. No matter how fast he spun, aside from the visual change, Greylancer was incapable of perceiving three-dimensional movement from within his chariot. Do not fail me, rear squadron. A peculiarly shaped spherical building encircled by rings came into view ahead. The anti-proton cannons affixed on either side of the chariot poured hot beams into the barrier shielding the building. The anti-proton beam was capable of vaporizing protons and all matter in existence. Yet the beams glanced off the barrier wall and only vaporized the unlucky OSB craft in the vicinity. It was a deadly gamble. Would the military bureau's dimensional cutter on Earth be able to disrupt the enemy's barrier from 300,000 kilometers away? If the cutter failed, Greylancer would fly into the barrier and be reduced to dust. And if the cutter were even 1,000th of a second off, Greylancer would be banished to another dimension. The greater noble did not flinch, and pointed the chariot toward the barrier. Was it his split-second evasive skills he trusted? The military bureau's invention, or his own luck? The barrier tore open. As the chariot plunged into the wide 1x3-kilometer tear in the dimension, the anti-proton stream reversed direction and the vortex dragged Greylancer's craft down onto the lunar surface, right into the OSB's base. Bait rake indicated by a small cross. Inside the oddly shaped building there existed silver-colored automatons, having no natural shape of their own. The OSB created organic beings by forming and discarding body parts, then stitching the disparate anatomies together. The patchwork beings were designed to carry out simple tasks. In parallel, the OSBs developed new and upgraded incarnations of robots until finally, combining the two offspring populations, they perfected organisms that might best be called cybernetic beings. Then the protean OSBs adopted the form of their own cybernetic creations, and gave rise to a unique civilization. The OSB appeared to possess a curiosity rivaling that of any other intelligent beings in the universe. It was only a matter of time before they ventured into the ocean of constellations. In fact, the imminent destruction of their mother planet had made the endeavor all but imperative. As their sun began to expand due to an abnormal nuclear fusion, and threatened to engulf the mother planet, the OSB devoted 5,000 years to the construction of a massive space fleet. Resting their fates in the stars, they set out for another realm. Tens of thousands of years later, their wandering journey ended with the capture of a lone space probe. After thoroughly researching its mechanism, the OSB decided to set course for the star system that produced this probe. Their intent was not peaceful coexistence, but invasion and conquest. Domination. Uncharted was just another word for wild, civilizing the wild in their own image. Such was the mission their deity had appointed them. and they were forgiven any means to carry it out. However, this would take another millennium. Although the OSB had developed a form of lightspeed technology, they discovered a habitable planet en route to the probe's birthplace and settled there. They required no longer than 100 years to make this planet their new home. The OSB slaughtered every extant species and a strange civilization, one that began as amorphous creatures and later took the form of cyborgs, was born. The OSB seemed fated to solitude. Scientists concluded that, despite enjoying a period of great prosperity, their civilization would become more isolated and eventually perish. The neighboring star systems were devoid of intelligent life. There were no species left to conquer. Plagued by pangs of existentialism, the OSBs redirected their attention to the now legendary probe in the distant stars. Thus, with 100 billion stars reflecting in the bodies of their aircraft, they embarked on a millennium-long journey of conquest. By the time they entered Earth's solar system, however, the nobility were already aware of their existence. Anticipating an invasion from outer space, the nobility had spread an elaborate surveillance network of satellites and planetoid bases throughout the star system. The first skirmish broke out somewhere near Pluto. Though the nobility's fleet was crushed by the awesome firepower of the OSB, the existence of the nobility struck fear in the invaders. Why? Blown into space, the noble warriors neither froze nor suffocated, but vanished into the void. After entering Pluto's orbit, 500 or so nobles had drifted around the planet until being rescued. The second battle unfolded in Saturn's orbit, but despite an eventual retreat, the nobility had dealt a great blow to the OSB. Made to reckon with an uncommon foe, the OSB deployed an advanced detachment to Earth. By possessing the humans they encountered, the OSB obtained intelligence on their vampire enemies. They were astounded to learn of the noble gift of immortality. Meanwhile, the vampires captured an unfortunate OSB that had stolen the identity of a noble. Predicting an even fight in a battle of brute force, the OSB built a permanent base on the far side of the moon. In anticipation of a war of attrition, because they subsisted by altering their form to absorb any nearby energy sources, they required nothing more than solar energy while in their lunar bivouac. Thus began the war between the OSB and nobility, that would span 3,000 years. First part end. Chapter 4, Crimson Song, First Part. Then Minsky pressed his hands. Minsky pressed his hands against his twitching cheeks. The commander was handpicked by the sacred ancestor himself. No. Then, Minsky pressed it. Then, Minsky pressed his hands against his twitching cheeks. The commander was handpicked by the sacred ancestor himself. No. Could it be? No. Could it be? A red wind gusted into the generals' hearts, blowing away sand and rock. The wind surfaced a rumor they'd forcibly kept hidden and dared not contemplate.